A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
We're going to be back into the deep end on some what are very controversial issues. There's some red flags, there's questions about freedom, about transparency, about alignment with global health bodies. Last week the Senate officially passed legislation to establish a permanent Australian Centre for Disease Control, a CDC. Now, you might be wondering where Christian-aligned advocacy groups sit on a CDC. Now, it's been some time coming, and it has passed the Senate last week, so it'll pass into legislation. But our special guest today has expressed fears that a CDC is like a Trojan horse for the World Health Organization, enforcing international health regulations that override Australian sovereignty and personal freedoms. George Christensen says the Australian Centre for Disease Control has nothing to do with controlling disease and everything to do with controlling you. Well, George Christensen is back with us. He served 4 terms in the Australian Parliament with the LNP. He's now the Australian Campaigns Director for Citizen Go. Now, Citizen Go operates from a Christian perspective, aiming to serve society by defending values like the sanctity of life from conception to natural death, religious freedom, including the right to honour God publicly and privately, marriage as a union of one man and one woman, freedom of conscience, education and association, and the belief that human beings are created in the image of God. He's also the founder of Nation First and joining us through the coming hour. And George Christensen, a special welcome back to 2020.
Well, thank you very much, Neil, and it's great to be back on 2020 talking with your good self.
So let's start with the thought. I know one of your more recent releases, George, is that there was an attempt to gag Senator Malcolm Roberts. They wanted to ram through the creation of the CDC without question, without any resistance. Do you think that's what's happened last week as it passed the Senate?
As it's passed the Senate, it's passed the Parliament, and yes, they did indeed gag Senator Malcolm Roberts and anyone else that wanted to speak against this bill on the crossbenches. And that's quite a shame. It actually almost sets up the narrative for a bill when they go and they gag it. I mean, stripping democracy from even the law itself or the making of the law itself. So if we go through what this bill is about and look at some of the things that actually Senator Malcolm Roberts wanted to say, just show how egregious the bill actually is. And can I just say, we at Citizen Go have been calling this out for a long, long time against much pushback. We actually said it was a Trojan horse for the World Health Organization, and I think that Senator Roberts and many other senators that actually have read the bill, that understand the powers that it has been given, would concur with us that that's exactly what it is. We had the Australian Associated Press run interference for the government, trying to claim that that was misinformation, although they didn't actually say that it was false. But what they did is they trundled out an expert to say that no, that's not true. It's not a Trojan horse whatsoever. Let me just break this down, and I'll start with the easy parts first because it's quite complex.
We'll come to some of that. The interesting thing is here, when we say the words Trojan horse, when you use those words, the image comes to mind. The Trojans and the wooden horse and coming in and, the soldiers then coming out and invading the city from within. It's all very well to say that some things may not happen in their current form, but once you have the legislation that's passed the Parliament, you don't know who's going to be in control of that provision just down the track a little way. Is this why we ought to be concerned? Because sometimes we talk about sleeper legislation, those sorts of things.
Yeah. And perhaps the term Trojan horse is probably not the best analogy here, because the Trojan horse was built by another people that was wheeled into a city as a gift. I mean, the reality is here that it is our Parliament, our elected representatives that have created this beast, and they've set it up there and have given it enormous powers. I've got to tell you that the head of the CDC has more broad-ranging powers than your local elected member of parliament has. And quite frankly, neither they nor the organisation will be able to be, quote unquote, interfered with, that's the pejorative term used, by any elected member of parliament. So if you go and complain to your local MP or your senator or indeed a minister, the health minister, for instance, the prime minister even, about what the CDC has done, there is not a thing that he or she will be able to do about it, because now it is written into the legislation that it is untouchable. And that's a fact.
Let's talk World Health Organization for a moment, because, as you say, this is coming from within our own parliament, but I think you've even travelled internationally and made some protests, or people on your team have been making representations around the world on the issues to do with the World Health Organization. Big Pharma and the WHO, you suggest they are the ones pulling the strings here. What have they got, a rod across the back of our Australian Parliament to make them come into line? What are your thoughts there?
Well, they don't need a rod, because the government's just completely signed up to the agenda. The Australian government is 100% behind the concept of a pandemic treaty. A pandemic treaty is not a concept anymore, I shouldn't say. It's actually a thing now, although it is missing a key plank to it at the moment. That is being nutted out by the World Health Organization and all the members of the World Health Assembly still. Nonetheless, a pandemic treaty of some form is a done deal. And it now is up to individual countries as to whether they're going to fully sign up to it, how they're going to sign up to it. One of the key conditions of the treaty, or what they call the accord, is actually the setting up of a primary, and I'm forgetting the acronym. There's many acronyms in these groups, but it's called a FEOC. And if I can remember, it is a Public Health Emergency Operations Centre, a FEOC. Whatever the acronym is and whatever the words are, what the World Health Organization wants is an established unit that they will deal with within a country. And indeed, the parameters for the CDC are linked quite intrinsically to the pandemic accord or the pandemic treaty. And so they will take their instructions from the World Health Organization. And yes, it might pass through a committee, but at the end of the day, the people who will be picked to serve on that committee and to head this beast will be 100% signed up to the pandemic treaty, just like the Australian government is. So that's how this is like a Trojan horse. And quite clearly, if you've read the legislation, if you've actually read everything that's gone into the creation of this body, all of the briefing documents, and I've read them. I've got to say, I've waded through these hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents to understand this and what's going on. It completely is a Trojan horse that's been set up by the Australian government themselves to actually have the World Health Organization reach into our country and actually dictate national health policy when it comes to pandemics and that sort of thing.
Okay, we might be wondering where other governments, like the Trump government in the United States, where they've been going with a CDC. As I understand it, they've been dismantling their CDC, and here we are going the opposite direction and building a foundation for one. Any thoughts there on if there's any sort of lead that might come from a Trump government?
Well, their CDC is actually quite different to what's been proposed here in Australia. Their CDC is something that, firstly, the government does have control over. It's not this now sort of quasi-independent body that the Australian CDC will be, and it's not linked really to the World Health Organization. And indeed, the new Health Secretary, RFK, Robert Kennedy Jr., that is, he has certainly gone into the CDC with a bit of a sweep, and they're making a world of difference, I think, to health in America, particularly against big food, the big food industry, and the kind of things that We see, as a result of the big food industry, and I'm certainly not one to talk, but obesity being one of the biggest problems, but a whole heap of health problems linked to that. So I think that what's happened over in the US just shows actually what's deficient about the Australian CDC. And there are actually members of Parliament, such as one of the Teals, I think it was Monica Ryan, who was arguing as to why the legislation need to be tightened to actually have less political control over the organisation. So less control over a government organisation by your elected representatives. That's what they wanted in the Parliament. It's quite bizarre that we want to set up these independent, unelected bodies that are run by bureaucrats, and to have politicians, the people who we elect to actually make decisions to run the government, have no control over them. None of these sort of organisations should actually be in existence in a democracy. It ends up turning democracy into a technocracy, and I don't think the Australian people ever voted for that.
Life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 on Vision.
George, it's all about keeping us safe, but I know that there's some issues here that so many listeners will see, and there's a bit of a red flag. There's a warning light starts to flash whenever we think of politicians keeping us safe. Ultimately, there may be some good things in a CDC for Australia, but there's this other darker dimension. How do you reflect on both sides here?
Well, actually, the CDC has some of the most bizarre powers and carve-outs that I've ever seen for any government agency. Let's go through it extremely quickly because I know that we don't have a great deal of time here. They've got powers that override actually other laws. It's built into the legislation. It says despite other laws, they can do certain things. So I don't know how that works, but anyway, that's in the bill, that they can actually do what they want to do, regardless of the fact that there might be other laws against doing what they want to do. There's penalties. There's actually penalties that the Director General of this organisation can give out for failing to comply with a CDC directive. Unauthorised disclosure of protected information is now subject to a criminal offence from this organisation, 2 years jail. So whistleblowers will go to jail if they speak out against something that the CDC does. Talking about whistleblowers, if you wanted as a member of the particular reason as a politician to get your hands on, what they're talking about, the information that they're using, there are now particular provisions which actually make certain material exempt from FOIs, Freedom of Information requests. So, and they can put practically whatever they want into that exempt material, including material where the Director General believes that it risks stigma, bullying or vilification. Now, I don't understand how a government agency can be stigmatised, bullied or vilified, but there you go.
Just pause and stay with us on this point for a moment, George, because I know that does ring alarm bells, because in a democratic society like we have in Australia, we might hope that there would be freedom of information where members of Parliament could make requests, or people who are in concerned positions where they're trying to hold various authorities to account, that they might be able to ask for information. And what you're saying is here that you won't be able to lodge a Freedom of Information request. That's actually in the legislation.
That's right. They've got this huge carve-out for them for FOI. You can still put an FOI request in, but pretty much the CDC Director General can basically take anything the organisation does, plonk it in the basket that says it's FOI exempt, and that's your answer. It truly is unbelievable. Worse than that, and look, I've got to say, I've heard this from Senator Malcolm Roberts. I have not seen it in the legislation, but I take him at his word. But my understanding is that the CDC is going to also be exempt from scrutiny by the Parliament. Now, there's this process in the Senate, which they call Senate estimates, where they drag in different agency directors or government department directors, and they ask them a whole heap of questions. CDC will be exempt from that process, is my understanding. So, to be exempt from even political scrutiny when it's a publicly funded public organisation. I mean, that's beyond the pale, but we're just talking about what it's being protected from. What it's going to do, Neil, is a different kettle of fish. I mean, this is why we should be alarmed about it. Your data, your medical records, even your business's sensitive information is now going to be up for grabs by the CDC. The Director General, this one unelected individual, a bureaucrat, is going to have the power to authorise the collection, the use, the disclosure of your private data despite any other law. And that means that your state and federal privacy protections could potentially be gone, overruled, brushed aside just at the stroke of a pen. It actually gets worse than that. If there's what they call a severe or unforeseen threat, which they don't clearly define, by the way, not defined in the legislation, then the Director General can issue something called the Data Sharing Declaration. And that lets your personal health data be shared across government agencies, even, get this, and I'm not joking you, even with foreign governments and foreign organisations like the World Health Organisations. And because of the way the legislation is written, Parliament, not the government, not a minister, not the Prime Minister, can do a single thing to stop them from doing it. They want them to do it. It's built into the legislation. The declarations made by the Director General are actually what they're immune from disallowance. And that's another curious thing that sort of, for this government organisation, I just explained that's a real sort of political speak term, Canberra speak term. But when a regulation is made or when a decision's made by a bureaucrat like this, there's normally the ability to have someone in the Senate get up and move what they call a disallowance motion, which effectively stops this decision without a vote. And so there then has to be a vote on it. And if the Senate vote no, that it can't go ahead, then the decision is pretty much nixed, and they've got to wait another 6 months before they can make a similar sort of decision. That thing, which is quite common actually, it's quite common to have government agencies subject to that scrutiny, it's removed from this legislation. So, as I say, the elected representatives, your elected representatives, they're actually locked out of the process. There's no warning for information being passed around, no requirement for consent, no requirement to inform you. It's a free-for-all, really it is.
Some listeners who texted in this morning, one listener who says, imagine if Dan Andrews became CEO of the new CDC Australia. You know, I know. I think for Victorian listeners,
I didn't think it could get worse.
I imagine that is even a possibility. I mean, Albo is good friends, as I understand it, with Dan Andrews. Hey, somebody else has.
It is. It doesn't have to be a doctor. The person, it's a CDC, Centre for Disease Control, and the Director General doesn't even have to be a registered medical practitioner or even linked to medicine at all. So it could be Dan Andrews.
You never know. Another guest, another listener says, "Hi Neil, I'm a prison officer in Western Australia and we were forced to get the C-vax or lose our jobs if I didn't want to get it because I knew it wasn't tested, and now so many people around the world, young and old, are dying from this mRNA spike protein. I'll never take another vax. They want to depopulate the world. That's out there, out their own mouths. They want to depopulate. I don't know whether that's the case. I'll get to your thoughts here in a moment, George. He says, we must fight back about this. It's funny when it comes to abortion. They say my body, my choice. But when it comes to vax, that's not really the case at all. Look, any thoughts? What stands out to you as a listener might be here, on the verge of a conspiracy theory focus? What are your thoughts?
Well, look, he's spot on with that last point. It is very funny that it's all my body, my choice when it comes to abortion, but when it comes to vaccinations, no, you're evil and you must be ostracised from society if you don't take a vaccine, which now the US CDC is actually saying was, and this is nearly a verbatim quote from their new people in there, really an untested gene therapy rather than a vaccine. That's what they're now saying. So as for the thing about depopulation, I mean, it actually is quite... Look, I'm not saying these two things are linked, but it is proven now that people like Bill Gates, who were the biggest pushers of that COVID vaccination during the whole pandemic, were signed up lock, stock and barrel to an agenda of depopulation. I mean, Bill Gates is completely and utterly for extensive population control. He makes he doesn't hide that fact.
Hey, George, I've got some listeners who are ready to just jump in here. I do want to talk to you about what's going on with the LNP and some perceptions on what might be happening with our national opposition. But I wonder whether we might just hold on to that and take some calls here from listeners. Rodney is in Adelaide in South Australia around the issue that we're talking about today. Hey, Rodney, welcome along. Thanks for waiting so patiently.
No, that's most welcome. It's lovely to listen, and welcome to you onto this program, George. Lovely to speak with you and hear what you've got to say. But my little comment is just that I think the CDC is very aptly named the Centre for Disease Control. Note, it is not the it's not the CDR, the Centre for Disease Reduction, but the Centre for Disease Control, because I'm quite sure that many of the diseases around the world are being controlled because a sick, fearful people are much easier to control than a fit, healthy, God-fearing population.
Interesting stuff there, Rodney. George, control and fear, they go hand in hand, don't they?
They certainly do, and I think Rodney's hit it on the head. My take, it isn't about public health whatsoever. It's about public control. That is a very good point, that the word there is in the name of the agency. Basically a COVID-era emergency state apparatus turned permanent with less oversight than we ever had before. And where you get fear, as we saw through COVID, you get control. And this agency will be doing it. It rewires the system. It creates a structure where an unelected official and other unelected officials under them and foreign agencies can have direct influence over our rights, our data, and quite frankly, our sovereignty.
Rodney in Adelaide, thank you so much for a great comment today. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. Let's go through some calls fairly quickly here, but Cal is in Tasmania. Hey, Cal, thanks for waiting patiently. What are your thoughts?
G'day, yeah, thanks for having me on. Firstly, thanks for opening this can of worms. I think it's really wonderful that a Christian radio station is tackling this one. A couple of thoughts from me. I'm a risk management consultant, and during the pandemic, my wife and I made a decision not to go down the path of vaccination. We were horrified at the results of that. One of the key planks of risk management is proportionality, and when George talks about control, and Rodney was talking about that just before, we were quite concerned at the absolute faith the public placed in the health system. When what it was saying appeared to be a little bit overconfident. And so we went down our own path of investigation and trying to figure out what was going on for ourselves and elected not to. But the consequences for us were quite horrifying, and then with job losses. And at one point I was even refused entry to the Hobart tip. And it was just, for us that was the alarming thing, was just the darkness that came out with COVID and the pandemic control. So I think Australians should be really, really careful about what's going on with this pandemic.
Cal, consequences, they sometimes can be quickly forgotten. George, thoughts here for Cal?
Yeah, look, he's right. It was just this horrible era where our rights were completely swept to the side. The idea of, doing your own research, reading, that was demonised. And it seems that that's all been forgotten now. It's all been forgotten. And this agency, I'm going to tell you, is going to have powers and influence together. And, the World Health Organization is going to have a big hand in that agency's powers and influence in making this happen all over again, if there is some other quote-unquote severe or unforeseen threat, which can be anything, by the way.
It can be anything. Cal, thank you so much for your contribution. Let's take another call. James is in Hornsbury in New South Wales. Hello, James.
Hello there. Yes, I'd like to talk about the current subject, thank you.
What are your thoughts?
Well, we all know that Christianity and our Trinity God, our wonderful Trinity God, is so right-wing, and that God the Father always votes for the LNP, Jesus, God the Son, votes for Pauline Hanson, and wonderful Barnaby Joyce gets voted by the Holy Spirit.
I'm assuming this is quite tongue-in-cheek from your side, Jim, because I'd like to think of God as being way above left or right. What point are you making here?
Not on the electorate roll.
My point is that on your radio station, it has such a right-wing bias, you should be ashamed.
Well, when we think of, sometimes we think of left and right, and if you've been a long-time listener, you'll know that the boot has been put in both sides many a time. And while we think of some of the conservative positions that we might lean to, that will be because of a classical conservatism which has its roots in a biblical foundation of truth. And so if conservatism happens to lean biblically Christian, of course we're going to be supporting that side, as we would be supporting a left side if it was going to be leaning towards a biblical truth as well. Jim, let me just get a thought or two here. Thoughts from you when we talk with Jim, George?
Well, look, I don't know that you take any sort of side, Neil. You're simply having conversations. So, that's about it.
And Jim, which particular issues are you thinking that as a Christian organisation we ought to favour something opposite to what we often talk about?
It's your 100% choice to do what you choose regarding your ideology. What I'm saying is that your ideology on the station's ideology on, I've been listening for a month, and for 90% of political discussions that I've heard, they always lean very heavily towards the right wing, very often insist that they must be right because God is on their side. You don't know if God supports the political views presented on your station.
Well, when we talk about political views, let's just take a pro-life agenda for a moment, where we might be thinking as Christians we want to favour life over death, and therefore we might take the side of an anti-abortion position rather than a pro-abortion position, or a pro-life rather than a euthanasia position. We might say that marriage is between a man and a woman rather than all sorts of other variations. I mean, can you find a Christian position that wouldn't sit where we typically talk about those?
It does not matter what I find. What matters is what you present. My reaction to what is presented on your station is of irrelevance to anybody else but me personally.
Let me bring George in here for a few moments, because oftentimes mainstream media, George Christensen, never presents a Christian view on these issues that James is talking about here. And therefore, the need for a media outlet that might take a position which is actually a biblically founded, godly position on some of these issues. Let's just bring George in here. George, what are your thoughts if you're in responding to what Jim is saying?
Well, there's 2 points that I want to make. One point is to say that sort of gospel approach to all sort of areas of life, whether it's lifestyle, whether it's politics or whatever, is not found in any other radio station in Australia with such a coverage that Vision has. So that's number one, and I commend what Phil, your CEO, is doing, and commend that fundraiser as well. If you want that to continue, you would be wise to donate, because I think the nation would be poorer without it. The other thing is, I mean, I can't speak for Vision. What I can speak for is Citizen Go. And, but I'm talking to you here on Vision, and you've raised the pro-life issue. We would condemn both sides of politics, probably actually the so-called conservative side even more so on that issue, because around the nation there has not been a very good track record for conservative parties or erstwhile conservative parties such as the Liberal Party in dealing with this. In fact, they seem to have engaged almost in a contest with Labor to see who can be more pro-death. And what's worse is that they pander to the pro-life movement during election campaigns. and then when they get into government, they go and undermine their values. So I think that actually the so-called conservative side of politics stands more condemned on the pro-life issue, and that's coming from the Australian director of a pro-life organisation here on a decidedly pro-life radio station.
Got James on the line, and James, I'll just remind you that during the marriage debate that led up to 2017, we were taking a position which was a biblical position, saying marriage is between a man and a woman. I'll just remind you, and George would have been part of this, but it was Malcolm Turnbull who led the LNP coalition to actually legalise same-sex marriage. We were completely against that, I might add, from a position when it comes to commentary around marriage between a man and a woman, because there's a biblical foundation there. James, just to come back to that, I mean, there's a lot of positions that we take, don't we, that really are contrary to the conservative side of politics.
Absolutely. And there are way, way, way more times that you present the ideology of Christianity that conforms very much so with the right-wing and often far right-wing side. Also, the presentation, you say the presentation of Christianity, etc., is not presented on other stations. Well, the same applies to the presentation of Hinduism. The same applies for the presentation of Islam. You can name any religion in the world on a commercial radio station, and it'll be the same thing. In other words, they treat you all pretty much the same. They ignore you.
Well,
every other religion. Now, how many Muslims do you have on this station?
You know, when we present programs talking about Islam, I get a Christian expert on Islam to be a special guest, and we tackle all of those sorts of things. And you know what? The beauty is, James, that you've got the opportunity to call in, and you've got the opportunity to present an alternative position, and you've taken that today, and you've taken that to actually make a bit of a criticism, which I'm just going to argue is not altogether founded because of these sorts of positions, because even as George Christensen said, there are biblical views that are ignored both sides, whether you're thinking left or right. And so as a Christian broadcaster, we have an opportunity to present a God's eye view based on what would be fairly orthodox standard study. And you might take that back to 10 Commandments, or you might take that back to just the ethics that we can glean from the life of Jesus. Those are the sorts of things that make a foundation for the things we talk about. But James, I want to thank you for your call. Time's running out, but you know what? It's a good point to be made. I want to thank you so much for calling through, and just to encourage those who are supporting this style of broadcast, don't drop the ball. Let's keep things happening and make things continue to go and to grow. Hey, George, let's move away from CDC for a few moments, because I just wanted to ask you briefly about some of the ructions and upheavals that are happening in the Liberal National Coalition right now. You were 4 terms in the Australian Parliament. What's the George Christensen view of what's going on? And I assume this has got to do with net zero and all sorts of things like that, but you need to be brief. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I will be brief. Look, the ship is sinking. It's sinking rapidly. I think that the current leadership of the Liberal Party is cooked. You can put a fork in it, as the old saying goes. It's done. I cannot see Susan Ley leading the party to the next election. If she does, it will be less of a Liberal Party. There will be fewer MPs and senators in there next time round. The reality is, this could be a terminal point for the Liberal. That's not an outrageous statement. Look at what's happened over in the UK with the rise of Reform, which has basically become the strongest supported political party in the country. It is not out of the question to see over the next, say, 5 to 10 years that transformation here in Australian society. It really does depend on what the Liberal Party does. They take on issues like net zero, whether they're going to continue to dance with people like the pro-life movement during election campaigns and then trot all over their toes during the governing phase. We need to see a turnaround on those fronts, and then they might turn around. Otherwise, they're going to be turning around in the grave because they will be long gone.
A quick thought or two here. You did have a brief connection with One Nation, and you decided to then launch your own organisation, Nation First. One Nation has gained a big boost in their membership. Is this significant, do you think?
Well, just to clarify, Nation First is the newsletter I run. It's not a political party, okay. But One Nation has had a huge boost. And, people are looking at One Nation at the moment and wondering, is this the genesis of a reform-style change? It would be a seismic change to Australian politics. That's yet to be seen, but they're getting a boost in the polls, they're getting a boost in membership, and there is now a lot more focus on what Senator Pauline Hanson and her senators across Australia.
Okay. Well, George, time's run out, but thanks for your insights on some of those issues. For listeners who want to keep a close eye on some of the issues that we were raising today, could be the CDC. We didn't even get to talk about one of the other big things that's coming. Of course, we're not too far away from the social media verification for those who are under 16, proving that you're an adult, and some issues there around digital ID and those things that are already legislated that will no doubt come to the fore when it comes to easy ways to manage who can be verified to visit whatever social media site that might be. You might want to keep up with some of these things that we've been talking about today. You can do so at citizengo.org. In fact, you can subscribe there and get regular emailings of updates. And Citizen Go, just to talk about that, and George, you're the National Campaigns Director for Citizen Go, operating from a Christian perspective, aiming to serve society by defending all sorts of good values. I mentioned those a little earlier. Just quickly, on the Christian Foundations for Citizen Go, what can you say for listeners that might get them to visit your website?
Well, if you do want to be part of this movement, which is growing rapidly, I got to say, we've increased our membership from under 20,000 to about 100,000 in the space of just 2 years. Go to citizengo.org. We are all about defending and promoting life, freedom and family. Yes, we do have an unashamed Christian perspective on that. But if you are not Christian, if you're atheist, agnostic, Hindu, whatever you might be, and you support life, family and freedom, you are more than welcome in our organisation as well. Citizengo.org.
George Christensen, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us today on 2020.
Thank you very much, Nell.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.